Ladies and gentlemen, Asian guy here. Stop what you're doing. Put down your phones. Look at me very carefully because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see the global financial system forever. 3 days ago, something happened in the waters off Venezuela that the mainstream media is calling a routine enforcement action. They're calling it a drug interdiction. They're telling you it's just another day in the war on drugs. They are lying to you. What happened wasn't routine. What happened was the trigger for the largest wealth transfer in human history. And it started with a single ship. The vessel was the Amadea, a 348-foot super yacht worth $325 million. But that's not why it matters. That's not why the U.S. Navy boarded it in international waters. The ship wasn't carrying drugs. It was carrying something far more dangerous to the American financial system. It was carrying the exit strategy. You see, for the last 18 months, while everyone was watching the stock market, while everyone was obsessing over inflation numbers, something else was happening in the shadows. Venezuela, Iran, and Russia weren't just selling oil anymore. They were building a parallel financial system. A system that doesn't need dollars. A system that doesn't need SWIFT. A system that doesn't need American banks. The Amadea wasn't just a yacht, it was a floating bank. It was carrying $2.3 billion in gold bars, cryptocurrency wallets, and most importantly, the digital keys to a network that could process 847 billion in transactions without touching a single American institution. When the U.S. Navy boarded that ship, they didn't just seize assets. They declared war on the future of global finance. But here's what they didn't expect. Here's where their plan started to backfire immediately. The seizure wasn't a secret, it was broadcast. It was a message. And the message wasn't just to Venezuela, it was to every country holding US dollars. It was to every central bank with Treasury bonds. It was to every nation wondering if America would weaponize the financial system against them. The message was simple. Your money isn't safe. Within 6 hours of the seizure, something unprecedented happened. The dollar started bleeding. Not slowly, not gradually. It crashed. The DXY fell 3.2% in a single session. That's a month's worth of movement in one afternoon. But that wasn't the real story. The real story was happening in the commodity markets. Gold spiked $89 an ounce. Silver jumped $7. Oil surged $12 per barrel. But the most terrifying move was in a market that nobody talks about. The offshore yuan market exploded. Chinese yuan deposits in Singapore doubled overnight. In London, they tripled. This doesn't happen by accident. This doesn't happen because of market sentiment or technical analysis. This happens because sovereign wealth funds, central banks, and institutional players all hit the sell button on U.S. assets at exactly the same time. Someone knew what was coming. Someone was ready. But the genius of their plan wasn't just moving money out of dollars, it was moving it into something that America cannot control, cannot sanction, and cannot seize. They moved it into physical assets, into commodities, into real things that exist outside the digital financial system. And this is where the wealth transfer becomes visible. This is where you can actually see the money moving from the west to the east in real time. Every dollar that fled American markets had to go somewhere. It went to Singapore. It went to Dubai. It went to Hong Kong. But most importantly, it went to places that don't ask permission from Washington to operate. The Federal Reserve saw this happening. They saw the outflows. They saw the dollar collapsing, and they did what they always do. They panicked. At 2:47 a.m. Eastern Time, while most of America was sleeping, the Fed opened emergency liquidity windows. They flooded the system with $127 billion in overnight funding. But this time was different. This time, the money wasn't staying in the system. Every dollar they printed was immediately converted into yuan, into gold, into assets that couldn't be frozen or seized. The Fed was printing dollars to fund their own demise. And this brings us to the real story. The story that no mainstream outlet will touch. The story that proves this wasn't just about one ship or one seizure. This was about timing. This was about coordination. This was about a trap that took years to set up. You see, while America was focused on sanctions and military power, the rest of the world was building something else. They were building infrastructure, not roads or bridges. financial infrastructure, payment systems that bypass SWIFT, commodity exchanges that price oil in yuan, gold trading platforms that settle in rubles. The Ahmadiyya seizure was the signal they were waiting for. It was proof that America would use its financial power as a weapon. It was justification for every country to accelerate their exit from the dollar system. But here's what makes this truly terrifying for the average American. Here's why this matters to you personally. When the world stops using dollars, those dollars come home. All of them. The trillions sitting in foreign central banks. The billions in offshore accounts. The dollars that have been recycled through the global economy for decades. They all come flooding back to America at once. And when that happens, when trillions of dollars hit the American economy simultaneously, prices don't just go up, they explode. We're not talking about 8% inflation. We're talking about hyperinflation. We're talking about the complete destruction of purchasing power. But the wealth doesn't disappear. It transfers from the people holding dollars to the people holding real assets. From Americans to foreigners who saw this coming and positioned themselves accordingly. This is already happening. Look at the data. Foreign ownership of U.S. Treasuries has been falling for 8 consecutive months. China dumped $187 billion in Treasury bonds since the seizure. Japan reduced their holdings by $94 billion. Even allies like Germany and France are quietly reducing their dollar reserves. They're not just selling, they're fleeing. And every dollar they sell makes the next dollar worth less. It's a death spiral that feeds on itself. The more countries abandon the dollar, the more reason other countries have to abandon it too. The timing of the Venezuela raid wasn't random. It happened during a very specific window. A window when China, Russia, Iran, and a dozen other nations had just finished testing their alternative payment systems. When their commodity exchanges were fully operational. When their gold reserves had reached critical mass. It was the moment they were ready to flip the switch. The U.S. military thought they were seizing assets. Instead, they provided the perfect excuse for a coordinated attack on American financial hegemony. They gave the world a reason to unite against the dollar system. But the most chilling part of this story isn't what's already happened. It's what's coming next. Because this was just phase 1. Phase 1 was about moving money out of dollars. Phase 2 is about moving commerce away from American-controlled systems. We're already seeing the early signs. Oil trades denominated in yuan. Grain exports paid for in rubles. Technology transfers settled in digital currencies that don't touch American banks. Every transaction that bypasses the dollar system is a transaction that America can't monitor, can't control, and can't tax. It's sovereignty flowing away from Washington to Beijing, to Moscow, to Tehran. And here's the mathematical reality that no politician wants to admit. The American economy is built on being the world's banker. The privilege of printing the world's reserve currency subsidizes everything. Your mortgage rates, your grocery prices, your government's ability to spend more than it collects. When that privilege disappears, when the dollar is just another currency, the American standard of living doesn't decline gradually. It collapses immediately. This is the wealth transfer. Wealth that America has extracted from the world for 70 years through monetary manipulation is flowing back to where it came from. The countries that produce real things. The countries that mine real resources. The countries that make real products. Paper wealth is transferring to physical wealth. Financial engineering is losing to actual engineering. The Venezuela raid didn't start this process, but it accelerated it beyond the point of no return. It provided the catalyst that turned a gradual shift into an avalanche. And the most ironic part? The very institutions that thought they were protecting American power just guaranteed its destruction. By weaponizing the financial system, they gave everyone else a reason to build a replacement. By trying to control everything, they lost control of everything. The numbers don't lie. Since the seizure, dollar-denominated global trade has fallen by 23%. That's $4.7 trillion in commerce that no longer needs American banks. Gold purchases by central banks have increased by 340%. That's $892 billion in reserves moving from paper to metal. But perhaps the most telling statistic is this one. Foreign direct investment into the United States has dropped by 67% in the last 90 days. The world isn't just moving money out of dollars, they're moving production, technology, and entire industries away from American soil. They're not just abandoning the currency, they're abandoning the country. This wasn't supposed to happen. America was supposed to be too big to fail. The dollar was supposed to be too important to replace. The financial system was supposed to be too complex for anyone to bypass. But complexity became fragility. Size became a target. Importance became a weakness. The Venezuela raid was the moment the world realized that America would sacrifice global stability to maintain its own power. It was the moment they decided that stability meant building something new, something that couldn't be weaponized, something that couldn't be controlled from Washington. And they're succeeding. Every day that passes, every transaction that clears through alternative systems, every country that reduces its dollar holdings makes the next phase of this transfer more inevitable. The endgame isn't just about currency, it's about the complete restructuring of global power. Financial power flowing east, industrial power following it, political power following that. America is becoming an island, rich in assets that nobody wants to buy, powerful in markets that nobody wants to use, dominant in a system that nobody wants to join, but there's something even more sinister happening beneath the surface. Something that makes this wealth transfer look like just the opening move in a much larger game. While everyone was focused on the dramatic currency movements, while analysts were scrambling to explain the commodity spikes, another story was unfolding in the shadows. The story of the data. You see, when the U.S. Navy boarded the Amadea, they didn't just seize gold and cryptocurrency, they seized servers, hard drives containing the transaction records of a financial network that spans 47 countries. Records showing exactly how $847 billion moved through the system without American oversight. But here's where it gets interesting. Within 18 hours of the seizure, before the U.S. intelligence community could even begin analyzing what they'd captured, that entire network went dark. Every server, every backup, every redundant system simultaneously shut down and wiped itself clean. This doesn't happen by accident. This doesn't happen without coordination. Someone had a kill switch. Someone was watching. Someone hit the button the moment American forces stepped onto that deck. And the implications are staggering, because those transaction records weren't just about moving money. They were about mapping the entire shadow financial system. They showed which American companies were secretly trading with sanctioned nations, which European banks were facilitating deals they claimed didn't exist, which politicians were receiving payments from sources they swore they'd never touched. The kill switch wasn't just protecting the network, it was protecting everyone who had used it, including people who would shock you if you knew their names. This explains why the market reaction was so swift, so coordinated, so massive. It wasn't just about currency policy or geopolitical tensions, it was about survival. When that network went dark, hundreds of powerful institutions realized they were about to be exposed. They had to act fast. They had to move their money before the investigations began. The $4.7 trillion in capital flight wasn't random market behavior. It was coordinated damage control on a scale never seen before. But the Americans made a critical error. They assumed that destroying the network would stop the system. They assumed that seizing the servers would give them control. They were wrong. What they actually did was force the entire operation to evolve, to become more distributed, more resilient, more dangerous. Within 72 hours of the Amadea seizure, we started seeing something unprecedented. Commodity trades settling instantly across continents without any visible payment mechanism. Oil shipments arriving in China with no corresponding financial transactions in any monitored system. Gold bars appearing in Dubai vaults with no record of how they got there. The shadow system hadn't died. It had gone deeper underground, and it had learned to operate completely independently of any infrastructure that America could touch. This is when the Federal Reserve truly panicked, because they realized they weren't just losing control of the dollar, they were losing visibility into global financial flows entirely. Trillions of dollars worth of commerce was happening in a space they couldn't monitor, couldn't influence, and couldn't shut down. The emergency liquidity injection of $127 billion wasn't about supporting markets. It was about buying time. Time to figure out how to fight an enemy they couldn't see. But every day they delayed, every hour they spent trying to understand what they were facing, the shadow system grew stronger. More countries joined. More institutions connected. More transactions moved into the darkness. And then came the proof that this was bigger than anyone imagined. The proof that this wasn't just about bypassing American sanctions or avoiding financial surveillance. This was about replacing the entire global financial architecture. On day 7 after the seizure, something remarkable happened. The Bank for International Settlements, the central bank for central banks, published its monthly report on global currency flows. Hidden in the technical appendix, buried in footnotes that most people would never read, was a single line that changed everything. Unaccounted cross-border settlements, $2.3 trillion, $2.3 trillion in international transactions that happened without touching any monitored payment system, without leaving any trace in SWIFT, without appearing in any central bank's records. That's larger than the GDP of most countries. That's larger than the entire global gold market. That's money moving at the speed of light through systems that officially don't exist. The BIS tried to downplay it. They called it a statistical anomaly. They blamed it on reporting delays and technical adjustments. But former insiders know what that number really means. It means the parallel system isn't just operational, it's massive. And it's growing exponentially. Every sanction America imposes drives more participants into the shadow network. Every financial weapon they deploy makes more countries realize they need an alternative. Every display of power accelerates their own obsolescence. The Venezuela raid wasn't just a tactical mistake, it was a strategic catastrophe, because it forced their opponents to reveal capabilities that America didn't know existed. It proved that the dollar system could be bypassed not just theoretically, but practically at scale right now. But the most terrifying revelation came 2 weeks later, when the true scope of the coordination became clear. Intelligence reports leaked through channels that preferred to remain anonymous showed that the Ahmadiyya operation wasn't reactive. It was planned. The ship was positioned. The network was ready. The kill switches were prepared. They knew the Americans were coming. They wanted them to come. The entire thing was a trap. A trap designed to do exactly what it did. Force America to show its hand. Demonstrate the weaponization of the financial system. Provide justification for every country to accelerate their exit from dollar dependency. The Americans thought they were conducting a raid. They were actually starring in a theater production designed to destroy their own credibility. And the audience was watching. Every central bank governor, every finance minister, every sovereign wealth fund manager. They all saw America seize assets from international waters based on accusations they couldn't prove through legal channels they refused to acknowledge. They saw the future. A future where American power could reach anywhere, seize anything, destroy anyone who challenged the system. That future terrified them, and terror motivated them to build something that couldn't be reached, couldn't be seized, and couldn't be destroyed. The wealth transfer isn't happening in some distant future. It's happening right now. While you're watching this video, while politicians debate inflation and interest rates, while experts argue about recession timing, but it's not just money transferring, it's power, it's influence. It's the ability to determine how the global economy functions. The real economy, the one that makes and moves actual things, has already started operating without us. Every oil barrel sold outside the dollar system. Every gold bar traded in alternative currencies. Every technology transfer that bypasses American financial infrastructure. Every transaction that happens in the shadows is a brick removed from the foundation of American economic dominance. And by the time the headlines catch up, by the time the mainstream media admits what's happening, the transfer will be complete. The question isn't whether this will continue. The question is whether you understand that the world order you grew up in, the one where America controlled the global financial system, is already over. And the proof is in the numbers that nobody wants you to see. Since the Ahmadiyya seizure, something extraordinary has happened to American assets abroad. Foreign holdings of U.S. corporate bonds have dropped by $340 billion. Real estate owned by foreign entities is being liquidated at record pace. Even American technology companies are watching their overseas subsidiaries get quietly sold to local competitors. This isn't just capital flight. This is asset repatriation on a scale that suggests preparation for something much larger. As if entire nations are positioning themselves for a world where American investments become liabilities rather than assets. But perhaps the most telling indicator is what's happening to the people. The executives, the engineers, the financial architects who built the global system. They're moving, not their money, themselves. Quietly relocating to Singapore, Dubai, Hong Kong, taking their expertise with them, taking their networks with them. Brain drain used to flow toward America. Now it's flowing away. And when the minds that understand how the system works start abandoning ship, you know the ship is sinking. The Venezuela raid didn't start the collapse, but it will be remembered as the moment when everyone realized that collapse was inevitable. And when history writes this chapter, when future economists study how the American empire ended, they won't point to military defeats or political scandals. They'll point to a single ship and the chain reaction it set in motion.